Hello, welcome to the session, and thank you for your participation. This session is a result of a repeating question that I used to get on the conferences many a times, and our ignorance towards the core issue that has been started surfacing and affecting the masses during the pandemic, and our mistakes for not paying attention towards the people who fall under this certain spectrum before pandemic. In this session, we will be referencing mostly web accessibility since it makes sense for the audience, and we will take some references from the whole accessibility spectrum as well, apart from the web accessibility, of course. The creatives used in this session are custom, as we have borrowed from the internet, and fewer custom, fewer borrowed from the internet. The references are from papers that are pouring from across the globe on accessibility and pandemic. Yeah. My name is Junan Masoodi, and I work at Acquia as a senior demo engineer. I come from a very beautiful place, Kashmir, and welcome again, and thank you for your participation, and hope to meet in person sooner or on the next DrupalCon. Yeah. During the pandemic, we have learned a lot from staying in an extended family to staying isolated, from cooking or washing to dusting, from cleaning to using basic medical equipments. While this is an experience, but we have lost too many to this fight at some point. For those who have lived through this harrowing experience, I sincerely congratulate all for being sane in these times. There are people who lost their jobs and had a very hard time, which they also get to new heights soon. Everyone deserves a good life and access to things. When I say everyone, I mean everyone. But there is a section that has been ignored and is or has been going through this experience, not for 2 years, but for the lifetime or maybe few years at least for some. Yes, I am talking about spatially abled people or everyone who falls under this accessibility spectrum. Um, in a conferences, back in a day when conferences used to happen offline, I was always asked this question: how do we motivate a client to make his digital experience accessible? The answer to this question that I learned for years now is that accessibility is not a feature; it is a necessity. If you go by the law, it becomes a necessity. If you go by the empathy, it also becomes a necessity. So it's not a feature. We will learn about this in a bit. Why I am saying this. When I say that accessibility is not a feature, it is a necessity. That means web is by default accessible. So if we create good user experiences, which are around best practices, and that makes this web by default accessible. It is our bad practices or workarounds that make this experience inaccessible. Now there is one more question: why accessibility? I think I have shortly answered it above, but I would like to pour some references here. According to the data from 2012, close to 1 in 5 Americans live with a disability of some time. Worldwide, approximately 1 billion, that roughly makes 15% population of the world that lives with that lives with the disability. Not all the disability keep people from reading screens and using the internet. For example, these figures include individuals who rely on the walkers, wheelchairs, but other conditions like visual impairment, difficulty grasping objects, autism, and deafness, just to name a few, can severely limit an individual ability to use a computer or a smartphone without accommodations. The most recent report that was compiled by the Usable Net into 2021, there have been 350 lawsuits filed against companies using accessibility widgets or overlays. So that takes us to another question, that when we are making our experience accessible, that means it is necessary to make them in a right way. That there should be no shortcuts in creating our experiences accessible. Yeah, I was saying about the usable net. They found that there were 350 lawsuits that were filed against the companies using accessibility widgets or overlays. The study also documents a 20% increase in ADA lawsuits. The top five industries are e-commerce being the number one, digital media and agency being number two, food service, fitness, banking, and finance followed by these two. Nearly every industry had a lawsuit related to mobile apps, and more than 26% of the companies that received an app accessibility lawsuit this year were previously sued for their website being inaccessible. The threat of the ADA lawsuit, while possible, is not a business reason to invest in inclusive design practices. Incorporating an accessible program from the ground up is a sound business decision, both now and for the long term. This may include thinking outside the box to gain a competitive edge. To exemplify it, digital marketers and complementary UX and accessibility knowledge are one option. Online chat help is intimidating for those who can't read or type quickly. Marketing to people who don't understand can be expensive. Excluding people with disabilities or impairments from your testing methodologies allows other companies to gain a competitive advantage. While this is about lawsuits, apart from that, there is one more side of accessibility for being a good reason for business. That is, it builds a positive public relationship. It avoids discrimination and legal complications. It contributes to positive company image. It boosts your SEO. It improves usability and user satisfaction. When we say it boosts your SEO, we go back to the sketchboard and try to understand this concept. It boils down to the basic HTML. When you have HTML, a semantic HTML, that H1 is the top, followed by H2, H3, H4, H5, and etc. That's how your search engine is going to read your page. When we are trying to search something on search engine, it checks for your H1, it checks for your few other parameters. For example, you have an image on a page. I go to Google and I search by the image. If there isn't any alt text on an image, it is probably that it is not going to show on the screen on the search engine. So designing with the best practices makes boost your SEO. That makes web accessible by default as well. Now, when we talk of the improving the usability and user satisfaction, I believe we have to go back to the designers who create these experiences for us. Having a minimalistic approach and a good approach is really great. uh, I'll give an example. If I am to create a new smartphone with a new OS, I have to have few videos across YouTube to show how to use the smartphone. So if I create an experience where a user will automatically understand what would be my next step, then we don't need those trainings at all. So creating a usable and a user satisfying approach in an accessible way makes it easier for everyone, for the people who fall in accessibility criteria or not. Plus, building accessible into enterprise grade applications that are accessible increases the quality of your app and overall user experience, thereby supercharging your digital transformation efforts. There is every reason to make web accessible as a part of your projects. The pandemic has showed us a few more things. It forced us to stay caged at a home and forced us to do the in-store experience from less than a 16-inch glaring screen. It forced us to type the product names from the weird keyboards or touch screens. Overall, it has made us to experience what accessible spectrum would have been, feeling forever. For example, you want to buy a furniture. The difference from in-store to a website experience is 3 to 4 on a scale of 10. You won't closely see the wood or a fabric texture because on a picture of 404 pixel, the subject is just spanning on 150 pixel. That's all. In an example taken from the web, I have painted the branding and the pricing parts, and few parts are left for an example. Here in the pic, there is no zoom functionality. not on click or hover. Most of the websites that let us zoom or hover have no alt text for images that tells us on hover zoom is also available besides the alt text. For accessibility purposes, there should be a plus or minus magnifying buttons for coming in and out, so that if we navigate using the tab, it would be easy and readable with the proper labels and the roles. That was both accessible and general experience. That way, both accessible and general experience will increase. On the right, even if a user isn't even a power user, it's really hard to read between the 11 pixels of 11 pixels with a fine gray dye. uh, I'll go for another example. There is a slider without arrows, but thumbnails, and they aren't tab functional as well. Don't look at anything but the font size. I assure you that it is the same on the browser as well. If we see at the top on the left side, we have a breadcrumb, and on the next, we have a next button on the right side, but they are really inaccessible. These days, we have screens having a brightness of more than 400, 500 nits, and this color will be really inaccessible on those bright screens. And the font size is, sometimes it's 18 pixel, but it is less than 16 pixel at least at many places. So yeah, so this has to be the first thing to bust the myth that small text looks good on a page. Standardizing a text size for around 16 pixel at least is really necessity. There are few myths that needs to be busted as well, but before that, uh, there is one more scenario that I would like to share with you. Me and my friend are out on a hiking. In between, we found a store that makes coffee. I went out on a sunny day to get 2 coffee cups. When reaching to the store, I saw there is a variety of coffee available there, and I picked the best two, one I liked for myself and the one I felt will be good for my friend. I paid and I came back, and I gave the glass to a friend of mine, but to my surprise, he didn't like it at all. From the color contrast of the coffee to the froth, he didn't like it. So I just had assumed that he would like it, but that's not the reason. That's not the way, I should have think. I should not have made assumptions about what he likes or how he would have his coffee. This is what we do with the websites when we build the websites. This is why so many digital experiences are not accessible. We do not want to know what anything outside of ourselves, what the other people wants to think about this experience. I'll give an example of a component here. Let me go to the next slide. Yeah. So this example of a component that we have created, this has been created in an Acquia Site Studio or maybe a vanilla Drupal installation, for example. The acceptance criteria of the ticket says that in the edit mode, there would be an image, a title, there would be a description, and a CTA button. There should be a drop down at the back of it to let a site builder to change the image position between left and the right. That's what the AC says. And in accessibility checklist, the image is a banner. The role of the image will be a banner, and the alt text and the proper roles. The alt text will be the heading of this. What we have this heading here, that will be the alt text of the image, and of course there will be proper roles as well. And the CTA will also be accessible, while the heading and description text is skipped. When I start tabbing on this, I get a hover on the image, and my screen reader picks up, and my keyboard also picks this hover, and it reads that it's a banner, and it reads the alt text as a heading. And when I click again, it takes me to the button, so that I can make a decision if I want to click on this button or not. Then I can pass to another component. uh, Now, back in the twig, I am writing the logic on stuffing the image as per the drop down that we created for putting an image on the left or the right. I write a conditional code that render image in a div, either before or after wrapping of heading, description, and CTA as per left and right properties on the drop down that tells me about the image placement. Now, when I start tabbing, so it will take me to the CTA first, leaving me clueless what this CTA is about. Then when I tap next, it is going to take me to the image where I'll get some idea of the component. Then I will have to do a back shift to reach to the button to make a decision if I want to go with this or not. So in nutshell, this isn't an experience. While on the paper it looks like a best practice to follow, the tab index from left to right for an LTR languages or vice versa for RTL, but the user experience call needs to make while developing or testing scenarios like this. There is more to it. There are suggestions that we usually skip. From an accessible experience, the first suggestion that we usually skip while creating our accessible experience: can all customers see your color choices? Yes, good color contrast makes it easier for customers to read your text. Download a tool to check your color contrast. Make sure the color contrast between the text and the background exceeds 4.5 is to 1. Can customers understand your video without sound? Yes, captions help the 360 million people who are deaf or hard of hearing, who don't understand video content. They also help someone who is watching a video on a mute on a bus. If your product includes video, support captions, or don't rely on any sound to convey your message. Can blind customers use your product? Yes, blind customers use tools like screen readers to experience the digital world. Close your eyes and try to use your feature of the product with the screen reader. If you can't understand where you are or what you do, you need to define and clarify the screen reader experience. Mick Scarlett, an expert in the field of access and inclusion for disabled people, says, hopefully, this pandemic has shown people that you can be trapped at home, but no fault of your own. You can also still contribute in the same way that we are trying to plan ending our lockdowns. Can we also plan for ending of a society being inaccessible? While going on this, with millions under lockdown, many non-disabled people are experiencing for the first time how it feels to have external barriers preventing you from participating in everyday life. But although countries around the world have put policies and practices in place to make public places safe, workplaces, other aspects, and societies more accessible, many barriers still exist for people with disability. I'll give an example. The layout and design changes that help people with the mobility issues. If all doors already had opened automatically, it would be easier for people with some types of disability to move freely. But it also means that no one would need to touch the doors, which would mitigate one risk of infection and potentially mean that everyone could theoretically go out sooner. There is a lot that I needed to share, but as we have a very less time, so I'll directly jump to the accessibility barriers. Anything that restricts access to web content is an accessibility barrier. Falling to design for accessibility excludes many, denying access to services, goods, or information. Five categories of disabilities can affect access of the internet, that is auditory, cognitive, vision, motor, and speech. Understanding the limitation of each category helps us define accessibility requirements, and these requirements can also be beneficial for everyone. For example, if you're holding a crying baby in one hand and you need to have a video consultation with the pediatrician on your app in another hand, or you are painting with the colors on your hand and the doorbell rings and you have to open the door. As we age, we all need to have a little more of accessibility in our lives. Even the healthiest of us will see some of these capabilities decline with time, that is vision, hearing, dexterity, and so on. So it makes sense to create our experiences for accessible people. And last not but least, to have a starting guide, we have a power principle from WCAG to get started with. And there is a good documentation on W3 Consortium and the Mozilla Developer Network as well. We can head start there and try to make digital experiences accessible from day one when we start to design our experiences on the canvas. I think that would be it. Thank you. Stay safe and be accessible. If there is any question that I